What's up, everyone? I'm Tony Dunst, and welcome back to the vlog. In this episode, we are talking March Madness, every gambler's favorite time of the year. We're going to break this vlog into 3 sections. We're going to start giving you some overall tips about how to assemble your bracket from a game theory standpoint. Then we're going to talk about some of the second-tier teams beneath the 1 seeds that have a chance to run deep in the tournament. And then we're going to talk about some of the first-round matchups where you can differentiate your lineups by picking some upsets. So let's get into it. Okay, the first thing to understand about constructing a bracket is knowing how many players you're competing against is very important. It's crucial because how contrarian you should construct your bracket is going to depend on the size of the field. If you're playing against 4 other people and you think they're going to mess around with their picks, then you should probably take very safe, chalky options like having Duke win it all and a lot of the 1 seeds making it to the Final Four. Now, if you're in a 100,000 person field with most or all of the prizes for just the winner, then you're going to want to make a pretty weird contrarian lineup that has a chance to be so different from that huge number of entries that you could actually scoop the entire contest if things fall just right. So, when thinking about your bracket construction, be very mindful of the size of the field and also the tendencies of your opponents, by which I mean, is this a bunch of professional poker players and gamblers you're up against who are going to check the lines of the first round and the odds of certain teams making it into the Final Four or winning the national championship? Or is this a bunch of fans from the Philadelphia area that are going to overvalue Villanova? Is this a bunch of casual sports fans who are going to overvalue the marquee universities and franchises? Or is this a bunch of, casual, just know-nothings about basketball, sports, whatever it is, who are filling it in based on jersey color? All kinds of weird stuff can happen in these March Madness contests. So think about what your opponent's tendencies are going to be. So to give you an example, if you are playing a contest with a lot of people that happen to be from the Philadelphia area, and you know that Villanova is a program that's had a lot of recent success in the contest, then you should probably have Villanova going out in one of the early rounds, maybe as a first-round upset, because you can expect a lot of those people to have Villanova going deep in the tournament. And remember, with these brackets, it's not about your ability to choose one team over another. If you were truly good at that kind of thing, you'd probably be a professional sports bettor. It's your ability to create a lineup that is different enough from your opponents that it maximizes the win value of the teams and matchups that you have, but also maximizes the overall chances of your winning this contest, especially if it's going to be top-heavy in the payouts, as many March Madness pools are. So let's start talking about the favorites. Obviously, Duke and Zion Williamson are the headline here. They are approximately plus 200 to plus 250, depending on the betting markets that you're looking at, which is remarkable in a tournament with 64 teams. They are a massive favorite in this thing. So if you're playing in a bracket with a lot of players who, watch a little bit of sports, but are probably going to go for the shortcut route for assembling their bracket, you are going to want to fade, by which I mean not take Duke to win the national championship or maybe even make it to the Final Four, because almost everybody in your pool is going to be choosing Duke to either win it all or make it to those Final Four, so they become the most tempting team to fade, and you want to find somebody along the way to the national championship or the Final Four that could potentially knock them off. Then Virginia, Gonzaga, and UNC are your next number 1 seeds. The odds markets would say that Gonzaga is slightly more likely to win it all than Virginia, but a lot of the analytics touts that I follow seem to like Virginia slightly better. UNC is not so much a team that is being disrespected as a team that runs into the best possible 2 seed within its conference. It has Kentucky in its conference, and Kentucky was very close to a 1 seed, and if you look at the betting markets, is the shortest odds of any of the non-1 seeds. I believe they're 12 to 1 in a lot of places, but I will throw out that they are 17 to 1 on FanDuel New Jersey. So if you have access to that site, maybe you want to get a little value there because they're running 12 to 1 in a lot of other places. So Kentucky is an interesting team because they have a lot of NBA caliber talent on the roster. However, they are typically fielding a lineup full of freshmen because so many of them move on to the NBA after their first year. When it comes to the other favorites, the 1 seeds, Which one you choose should not really depend on how much belief you have in that program or what you know about them, but it should depend on the difficulty of their conference and also the likelihood that other people in your bracket are going to choose them. So for various reasons, I kind of think that Virginia and UNC might be the most slept on number 1 seeds. Virginia had historic loss in the first round as a 1 seed last year in March Madness. I think a lot of people might be a little risk averse about them because of that loss. However, it's possible that many people have already forgotten about it because we all have the memory of a fish in 2019. Meanwhile, UNC is a program that gets a lot of credit, but as I said, is going to run into Kentucky, not to mention a number of other very tough teams in the Midwest Conference, including Iowa State, Auburn, and Kansas, who was the number 1 seed prior to the year. I will shout out Kansas as my hot pick for a long shot-ish team to take down the entire contest. Kansas is currently 60-1 on FanDuel New Jersey's sportsbook. I've seen them at around 40 or 50-1 in some other places. And Kansas was the number 1 seed going into the year prior to the basketball season starting because of the enormous caliber of talent that they have on that roster. They have underwhelmed, but they've also been victim to some injuries along the way in the season, and their freshmen haven't coalesced the way that some people were hoping or projecting that they would. Still, now that we're late and deep into the season, perhaps they come together as a team, and that initial projection of them having a lot of talent bears out. So yeah, Kansas at 60-1 would be my kind of hot pick. If you had to choose one as a long shot to win the tournament. The other one would maybe be Texas Tech, which is a 3 seed coming out of the West. They would run into both Gonzaga and Michigan, were they to make it out of their conference, who are 2 extremely powerful teams. However, Texas Tech does have the best defense in college basketball by some metrics. And whenever you reduce the amount of possessions in a game, you increase the variance in a basketball game at least a little bit. And so I kind of like Texas Tech as a sleeper if you want somebody outside the top 4 or top 8 teams to take down the national championship. I think choosing Kentucky coming out of the Midwest is interesting, but I do believe the Midwest is probably the most difficult conference. And I like Virginia very much coming out of the South. There are definitely some talented teams in that conference, but I do think it is one of the weaker ones, and Tennessee in a lot of the rankings grades out as the weakest 2 seed. And lastly, I want to talk about some round 1 upsets that you can choose to differentiate your lineups if you're going to go with some of the chalky, obvious favorites going deep in the tournament. So, what I did was look over all the point spreads on Pinnacle, and I tried to find the games where there was the largest gap between the point spread and the rankings of those teams. So to give you an example, Marquette faces off against Murray State. Marquette is at 5, Murray State is at 12. However, there's only a 4.5 point spread on that game, which means that a lot of people casually filling out their lineups who don't want to do that level of homework will just see a 5 and say, well, okay, clearly they're a big favorite over a 12. Boom, just fill that in. Whereas if you look at all the various 5 versus 12 matchups, there is a much larger gap in the point spread in that one than the other 3 games. So Murray State versus Marquette has a 4.5 point spread. The other game with a 4.5 point spread that I thought was enticing was Cal Irvine against Kansas State. Now, part of that is very injury relevant. Kansas State's best player was injured right before their conference tournament, and he sat out the entire tournament, and it is very questionable, some would say doubtful, whether he suits up for the Friday game. Were he to suit up, I would imagine that that line and the gap would get larger. Right now, I think it is probably priced in a way that he is on the doubtful side of things, which makes me like Cal Irvine a little bit more, particularly since they are a fairly strong program for their ranking. And since UC Irvine is a 13 seed facing a 4, yet again, I think a lot of people quickly filling out their brackets will not really consider an upset happening there that seriously. Then there are 3 games with a 2 point spread or less between seeds that are fairly close, with the exception of the Oregon-Wisconsin game. Wisconsin is a 5, Oregon is a 12. But Oregon has been a very streaky team during the season, as has Wisconsin, and for whatever reason, Wisconsin is only a 1.5 point favorite in this matchup. Now, maybe something weird is happening in the betting markets and we should all load up on Wisconsin in this game. If not, the markets are indicating that the 12-5 seeding of these two teams is incorrect and that something is going on here. So I think as a first round option for an upset, Oregon is a very tempting choice. Next, I like Baylor versus Syracuse. Syracuse is one of those programs that has a lot of name recognition because they've done so well in the tournament in the past, and Jim Boeheim is something of a headline coach in college basketball, although obviously for the wrong reasons lately with him running over somebody and killing them this season. That said, Syracuse is an 8 seed and a 20-win team this season going up against Baylor, which is a program that most people don't give much thought or consideration. It is a only 2-point spread in that game that Syracuse is favored. Now, I don't have any particular read on Syracuse versus Baylor or how they match up or what Boeheim's coaching tendencies are. However, I do know that a lot of people just think that, oh, Syracuse, that's a really serious, prestigious program. I'm sure they'll roll over Baylor. Therefore, I want to be on the opposite side of that, especially considering how close the line is. So I'm going to go with Baylor. And lastly, we have Florida versus Nevada. That's a 7 versus a 10. Florida is the 10 versus the 7. Nevada is a pretty strong program, but Florida is just a 2-point underdog in this matchup. And again, I don't necessarily know a lot about either program, but when there's a pretty large gap and only a 2-point spread, that to me seems like a good way to differentiate my lineup, especially if it's going to be one of those that has a lot of the chalkiest picks going deep in the tournament. As for what I'm gambling on this week, I have bought a piece of 2 lineups that are going into a $1,000 per bracket contest that's being run by World Series champion Ryan Reese. I built those 2 lineups with my friend Emil. He and I made sure to compare our lineups so that there wasn't much overlap going on. We have one with Duke winning it all and one with Duke getting knocked out by Texas Tech. So we made sure that in the lineup where Duke made it to the end, Texas Tech did poorly, and that a lot of the early round upsets that I chose that were marginal, we went the opposite way on the opposing lineup. If you're going to submit multiple lineups into a contest, make sure that there's not a high degree of overlap unless you're incredibly certain about college basketball, in which case, please send me your hot picks. All right, that's it for this time, guys. Best of luck in all of your contests and all the bets you make this week. Next week, we've got the Venetian WPT coming up on my home turf here in Las Vegas, and we'll get back to the poker action. I'll see you. So if you've enjoyed this vlog and want more great gambling content, please subscribe and I'll keep it coming for you. Thanks.